at Crafton Hills College. This panel was put together pretty much because Jeff Cervantez and I had a very similar idea of doing something like this, and I told him I wanted to do it, gave him the reins, and he made it happen. So thank you, Jeff, for putting this together. And in case you didn't know, September is Religious Diversity Awareness Month, and so that's kind of what sparked the idea in wanting to host this here on campus. I was fortunate enough to be able to sit with these gentlemen in the room during Jeff's class earlier this morning, and today you'll get to see a piece of that, but then you'll be able to contribute as well. So with that being said, what we'll do is I'm going to pass around a roll sheet. If you can just put your name and what campus role you play, whether you're student, staff, faculty, or community member, meaning not necessarily this Crafton community, but just around the community, you can write that too, and welcome as well. I'll also be passing out a 3x5 card. We have some pre-scripted questions to get the ball rolling and get your creative juices flowing. But after that, we want to hear from you too. What questions do you have for our panelists? So you can write those down. And as you finish them, if you just want to walk them here and maybe stand in a little line of 2 people, once somebody gives their question to Jeff, then one more person can join in the line. That way we just don't have our entire audience lined up on the side over here. So I'll get those to you. And on a side note, just to further advertise our programming within the diversity and inclusion programming, we have our monthly newsletter and our calendar of events. So I'll get those out to you as well. And that's all I have, so I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Cervantez.
Great. Yes, so thank you again for coming, and thank you to the panelists. This is our second round for today. We did have a very successful and fun and exciting, lively discussion at 11 o'clock in my world religion class, and I'm hoping we can repeat the magic here again, and I'm sure we will. This is a very fascinating discussion. And so I want to just briefly introduce our panelists and then jump into some questions. As Brianna said, I do have some pre-scripted questions here, but we had a lot of just organic back and forth discussion in the first one, and I'm hoping, again, we can have some of that. So do write some question down. Feel free to raise your hand if you have a follow-up question to ask directly to one of the panelists in response to what they have already said. That's welcomed and encouraged. Okay, so please do that. Panelists, just put your hand up when I read your name, and so we can introduce you. Eric Ozels here. He is here representing 2 organizations, the Inland Empire Atheists and Agnostics community and the Freethinkers Around Redlands community. And he has been an active member of these communities for about a year. Let's please welcome Eric. David Miller. He has been practicing Buddhism all his life. He is a member of the Soka Gakkai Buddhist community located in Riverside. Let's please welcome David. Steve Sarembi. He has been a Roman Catholic since his baptism, 10 days after he was born. He is currently an ordained deacon and pastoral coordinator for the Holy Name of Jesus Catholic Community of Redlands. Let's please welcome Steve. Ian Diorio has been a practicing Christian since his conversion at the age of 21. He was, before this, he was raised in a secular home, and currently he serves as the lead pastor at Yucaipa Christian Church. Let's please welcome Ian. So, again, let's thank all of our panelists for coming. So grateful to all of them. So let's just jump right into it. I'm going to direct the first set of questions to an individual panelists, but again, if you have follow-up questions, please ask those. So the first question is for Mr. Miller. If we are all the reincarnation of other human beings, as Buddhism seems to believe and teach, then why does the population keep expanding? Where do all these new human beings come from?
And so to start, our particular form of Buddhism, it's called Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism. And so Buddhism originated with Siddhartha Gautama or Shakyamuni Buddha about 2,500 years ago. And the foundation of our practice is based on the Lotus Sutra, which is his final teaching before his passing. And also based on that it's Japanese Buddhism by Nichiren Daishonin, which was a 13th century priest in Japan. And so that's kind of where the concepts are coming from. And so as far as reincarnation, that reincarnation isn't necessarily a person's entire being and soul being transferred from one body to the next, that it's really more of a rebirth. And so the difference between being a continuity of the person after death, it's more of a continuity of life after death. And so the person's karma, or the tendencies that they had during their lifetime and the various actions that they took during their lifetime, is what's transferred from one lifetime to the next. So it's not necessarily the person's inherent memories and their gender, their particular role in society. Those things don't transfer over. And so for an example of what that means, that our current president, Daisaku Ikeda, equates it to saying, I find it helpful to compare the cycles of life and death to the daily rhythms of waking and sleeping. Just as we look forward to the rest sleep brings after the efforts and exertions of the day, death can be seen as a welcome period of rest and re-energizing in preparation for a new round of active life. And just as we enjoy the best sleep after a day in which we have done our very best, a calm and easy death can only follow a life lived to the fullest without any regrets. And another example of that would be kind of a wave in the ocean, that as the wave rises in the ocean, it's kind of like our birth, and as the wave goes back into the ocean, it's kind of like our passing. And so the droplets of water that created that wave don't go anywhere necessarily or disappear. It's just that in the future they'll reform back into a wave at a later time given the correct causes. And so that's what the rebirth means.
Thank you. So the next question, yeah, feel free to applaud. Yeah, go ahead. That's welcome. The next question I have here, remember, you're encouraged to ask follow-up questions if you'd like, is for Deacon Steve.
Have ever had a family member or friend say to you, particular perhaps from the older generation, the more mature generation, will you pray for me? Or the opposite? Yeah, right. Well, that's really what our relationship is with Mary when it comes to prayer. We're not praying to Mary, but just like we might ask someone to pray for us, we ask Mary to what we call intercede, because she is with God, right? And we ask her, in essence, to pray for us to the Lord, to God the Father, God the Son. We don't worship Mary. I think that was part of that question. Rather, we honor her, really is probably the best word, because it was her yes, her assent, purely voluntary, to be the bearer, the mother of the one who we believe to be God, Jesus. And her yes allowed Jesus to become incarnate, infleshed. And so we honor her because she is not only Christ's mother, but because we are what St. Paul called the body of Christ, in a sense, she is also our mother. And so we look to her as a figure, like we look to all the saints, really, as examples for us. She was the first disciple, and all other disciples came after her. And so we honor her. We would like our lives to be like her, to say yes to God. And no matter what God asks of us, to follow her yes.
Thank you. Mr. Ozals, so this question is directed for you. Why do atheists think there is no God?
Well, again, I want to get credit for trying to be at least nice in the start. So I'll again thank the administrators, a new group, thank the college and my fellow panelists and the audience members, my groups for honoring me to represent them. I appreciate all of that. The question is, why do atheists think there is no God? I want to lay a little bit of groundwork here. A couple of small gripes I mentioned in the last class. The last word of the sentence is God, G-O-D. It's got a capital letter in it. And if you don't realize, that's a little assertion that there is one God out there in Western culture, and he does exist, and you can choose to believe in him, or you can choose to be an outcast and not believe in him, right? So that's a small, minor gripe in how the question is phrased. The second one is when you say atheists think there is no God, it's really a little bit of a misrepresentation of the majority of how atheists, or people who consider themselves or call themselves atheists, or the definition applies to them, relate to their position. There's a vast majority of them who consider themselves implicit atheists. Okay, so I'd say about 90 to 95% of people who don't believe in a God, just lack a God belief, consider themselves implicitly atheistic. Okay, if you have a positive God belief, if you have a positive belief that all God claims which have been presented to you so far are demonstrably wrong, they're false, then you consider yourself a strong or an explicit atheist. So this question really would be more for an explicit atheist, but I'll answer from both angles. An explicit atheist would say, based upon all the claims that have been made to me up to this point throughout all of history, we've had all these claims about supernaturalism. I know my friend doesn't like that term. Faith-based traditions relating to the supernatural. Because they have not presented evidence for their claims, I think that those claims are wrong. Okay, this would be a positive atheist assertion. An implicit atheist would say something more along the lines of, I simply lack a God belief until you present me with one. Okay, a pragmatic atheist. If you can present me with evidence, you'll change a credible evidence. You can change my ideas and my concepts overnight. But if you continue to represent this with no credible evidence, I will maintain an implicit atheist position. I myself personally do not identify either way because I don't think the word atheist should exist because we do not call things what they are not. I call this my watch. I don't say this is not my car. Okay, we don't label things in the negative. It is a failure of language to label things by what they are not. It is absurd to go around labeling everything by what it's not because we'd never get anything done, right? So we label things in the positive. Positively, I like everything that the humanists are doing. I like several other groups out there that are doing charitable work. Those are things I do in the positive. My lack of a belief in other systems is not how I define myself. Fair enough?
Thank you. Okay, the next question here is directed at Ian Diorio. Why do you believe Jesus rose from the dead?
Well, I see the card going up, so I just want to say it's an honor to be with you guys. Thanks so much. I'm a little winded from the walk from the other building, so I have less energy. And I would say this just quickly before I get into the answer. I believe it is a good thing that people of different opinions model civility and integrity and honesty and love. We do not have to agree to love each other. Isn't that true? I can love you if we don't agree. And lots of people I love are wrong about a lot of things. And I'm sure I'm wrong about a lot of things. So love should be the center. The question is, why do I believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead? This is the center, the linchpin of the Christian faith. If this did not happen, there is no Christianity. So for me, I'll give you some reasons or evidences that I believe Jesus rose from the dead. Ultimately, though, there is both historical, existential, metaphysical reasons to believe such a thing that underpin these historical reasons, so we can have a deeper conversation about that. Number one reason I believe that Jesus rose from the dead was because there was an empty tomb on that Sunday. I believe Jesus Christ is a historical figure. People like Bart Ehrman, who's an atheist agnostic, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, would argue that Jesus did exist, that there was an empty tomb, that there was an original belief in the resurrection of Jesus post Jesus' crucifixion under the Pontius Pilate, who was a Roman procurator during his day, historic figure. Jesus' tomb was empty. That was a very antagonistic reality for those people who did not want Jesus in power. They crucified Jesus. Wouldn't the easiest way to convince people that Jesus was not raised from the dead, go to his tomb, hang out his empty body in the middle of the public square, and say these people who are telling you that Jesus was raised from the dead are absolutely, 2 crackers short of, cheese and cracker plate, because there he is. There's his dead body. If someone said, your grandma raised from the dead, and I was able to get her corpse, put it in the center of the community, and there she is, that'd be a pretty good way to get the belief out of question. And yet that did not happen. In fact, the earliest criticism of Christianity was that they stole the body because there was a missing body. I believe because of the testimony of the early Christians. The earliest people who said that Jesus was raised from the dead were women. Now, if you were trying to create a mythology that would take over the world for political power, you would not make women the witnesses of the empty tomb, because they were not allowed to give, and I love, God bless you, women power, but in the first century, Women could not be representatives in jurisprudence, both Roman jurisprudence and Jewish jurisprudence. And the New Testament church and the early church for thousands of years has stuck to the women's testimony. The women saw Jesus raised. The transformation of Paul the Apostle. Paul was killing Christians, we know historically. Time magazine said the two most important people who live, Jesus. Paul is often a close second because we live in a post-Pauline world. Paul was antithetical Christianity. He converted. Lastly, existence of the church, and I believe in the real lived experience of Jesus Christ today, which all of us can experience through a relationship with him.
Yeah. Any follow-up questions? Okay. Yeah, okay, yes.
You based a lot of what you said on they saw, the women saw, people saw, and the way that was written in the book. How reliable do you consider eyewitness testimony to be, even if it were today?
Yes. Because just in general eyewitness testimony, I think the testimony of the people who are involved really matters for eyewitness testimony. Obviously, the first thing that a lawyer or a judge would look at would be the credibility of these witnesses. These early witnesses not only were followers of Jesus before his death, secondly, didn't believe that he was going to raise from the dead. We know that the earliest Christians had no conception pre the resurrection of those following Jesus of the resurrection. This wasn't something they were expecting. Ooh, he's getting crucified today. We're excited for Sunday to come. They were themselves shocked by the resurrection. The Apostle Paul wasn't a believer in Jesus Christ. He was a secular Jew who studied under the Rabbi Gamaliel, who's a historic rabbi. So he wasn't a believer himself, yet he was confronted by the resurrected Jesus, and he changed his opinion. He had a mind shift, a cosmological shift on what the world was like. I would say, in general, what we know about oral testimony is specifically among the Jews. These were an oral people. Papyrus was very rare in the ancient world. It wasn't as if everybody had books and paperbacks. So the idea that orality or oral witness should be held in suspect is something that we look with chronological sobriety at our technological informational culture and look back and say, oh, they couldn't know anything. Well, if that's true, then I think we should throw out history in general. Because if we're going to throw out the history of the early Christians, of which we have more documentation and representation than any other thing in the history of the world, including Greco-Roman thought, there's no more manuscripts in the New Testament. That's a historic fact. So the idea for me that we have to be suspect of oral testimony or witness, I would say what's good for the goose is good for the gander. We should get rid of every single belief historically then, because historicity is not based on age of representation. It's based on artifacts such as writings, archaeology, truth claims. And I would say Christianity does not create a mythology out of nowhere. They work from a tradition, a historical tradition with Judaism, and they create a new tradition within Christianity that has more manuscript representation than any other tradition. So I would say, for me, it seems to me they took these claims seriously enough to die for them, make mass productions of these representations, and spread this message which has so radically impacted the world for 2,000 years. So for me, I think I take it very much strongly, and I would not want to discount them just because they have a particular belief that we don't find credible in our modern world. If we're going to critique historiography, I think we have to be consistent.
All right. Thank you. Our next question here is directed to all the panelists, and so we can just go down the line here, all right? And the question is, and by the way, all these questions were penned by students from my courses, and I just consolidated them into this list. But again, feel free to write a question on the 3x5 card that Brianna passed out, and we can take your question if we have time. So question is, what, if anything, awaits the soul after death?
Well, from a Roman Catholic perspective, it really is the perspective of all Christianity. The soul is inalienably connected with the body. And so we believe that at our death, that our body comes with our soul. Now, maybe it's not our physical body, which we see rots away, right? But it is a resurrected body like Jesus' body. And so if we have faith in Christ, we are resurrected just like Jesus was, in a sense, to be with God in eternal life, to put it simply.
Thanks, Steve.
I feel like a little bit out of my element here, but present me credible evidence for the existence of a soul, and then we can talk about where it may or may not go, if it's possible for things that exist to go places, which I'm in favor of, right? I'm not in favor of saying that things that don't exist can go places. So until I see credible evidence to suggest the existence of a soul, I'm sorry, you just haven't presented, you haven't made your case, okay? So one of the popular cliches among many secular activists is to say they believe in death, in death after life. Death, by definition, is a cessation of life. That's what death means, okay? So then to say your particular faith tradition, okay, or your particular ideas about how the universe works, naturally or supernaturally, have gotten it right throughout history is to make a great assumption, okay? We are appealing to a greater mystery to solve a mystery. I don't know what happened to my soul after life, so I'm going to solve that problem by appealing to, well, it must have been something supernatural. Supernatural means it must have a supernatural explanation, a supernatural origin. It cannot simply just not have a natural or a natural explanation. If I don't know something, I don't get to automatically assume it is supernatural, okay? So if you show me that I have only natural elements of my body that are contained within the parameters of my body, then that's what I'm going to think until you give me reason to think otherwise. So if I don't have a soul, it can't go anywhere after I die. Fair enough?
Steve, you want to follow?
Sure.
Follow?
Part of the issue here is that we're human, right? We are within our human bounds, and we only see about a quarter of reality, where God sees 360 degrees. In our humanity, we will never know it all. We will never understand it all. We have to go by what we do have. And we have the gospel. We have the tradition, the faith tradition. And through that, we either have faith or we don't have faith. And that's really what it comes down to. So if we think in our humanity that we are going to figure it all out through science, proving or disproving anything, and science is really catching up with theology now, because theology has always been way beyond science. And if you look at the current evidence, really, we're looking more and more to maybe there is God and there is scientifically life after death.
Real quick, 10 seconds if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
In the last session you said this as well, and I don't want to sound condescending, and this is not pejorative at all. 360 degrees only relates to the second dimension. Okay? If you're talking about a God that can see in all directions, you would say omnidirectional or omnivision, right? 360 degrees only relates to a flat plane around you in 360 degrees. So I personally, if I believe in a supernatural God, I wouldn't limit him to the second dimension.
Well, you have to be able to understand the figurative beyond the literal.
I agree. I'm just letting you know that linguistically, there might be a lack there. Just trying to help out.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Same question?
Same question.
Oh, again, I have less energy. What I would say is this: a few things. We've talked about, is there a soul? Is there a body? I just flatly, I'm a substance dualist. I do believe that you are a composite of a soul and a body. I don't believe your brain is all that you are. And that 8 pound of gray matter does not, is not your identity. I believe that you do have a soul. But here's the thing that's unique about Christianity. Christianity does not believe in some generic, like grandma died and she went to heaven. I know that's what everybody's been taught and everyone assumes Christianity teaches. But what Christianity teaches that is the world is between two worlds. The world that was a world that was characterized by sin, death, decay, destruction, entropy. You are going to die. Your body will die. It's going to decay, fall on the ground. And that's true. That's entropy. That's what happens to matter. I don't believe that we are only our bodies, so I don't believe that's true. But Christianity is unique in this way because we believe what happened to Jesus was his physical body was raised from the dead. That he was literally raised, a composite of soul and body. And so what I believe is going to take place sometime in the future, which will be, by the way, the evidence retroactively for the past, is that one day there'll be a resurrection of all bodies, those who are faith in Christ, and those who do not. All will be raised from the dead for the judgment. That's what the Bible teaches. Now, where do people go when they die? Lots of people believe in heaven, hell, purgatory. I believe life is a relational concept in relationship to God. God is the source of all life. So those who reject God at the death of their bodies reject the source of all life. And in that, they may die. Some people believe what's called a nihilism, that when you die, you just die. When you're dead, you're dead. Your parents don't remember you. Kids that you married, you're gone. 4 generations from now, no one cares. Doesn't matter how much money you made. Steve Jobs and the poorest person, they end up in the same place. Well, Christianity doesn't believe that that's the final reality. We believe if you have a relationship with God, that part of you that is eternal, the part of you that's a soul, goes into the life source that gave it life in the first place, which is a relationship with God. That all of us either live from the source that is God or from without it. And those who have a relationship with God continue in that relationship with God. Christians have classically called that heaven. What heaven is not some place we go to. Eventually, the Bible talks about a place that will come here. There'll be a new heaven and new earth. God's going to do a fresh act of creation. Just as 14.6 billion years ago, there was a singularity that started ex nihilo, out of nothing. There'll be a new creation, a new world. And Jesus is the first taste or first example of what that world will look like.
Yes.
I talked about a little bit about this for the reincarnation, rebirth part. The most important part of it, though, is that a lot of people have the tendency to look at karma as like a negative thing, or when they express it to their friends, they're like, oh, it's just my karma that, my car gets hit, or, whatever it is. But it's not a negative or a positive thing, that it's basically just the accumulation of all the different causes that we've made in our lives, and that creates the effects that we see in our life. And so in the rebirth process, that the most important part is our current lifetime. Because what really differentiates it from Hinduism is that Hinduism has a caste type system, where in order to get into a higher caste, that you have to go through lifetimes and lifetimes of austerity and good practices, and maybe eventually you'll get to the next step, and then the next step and next step, and so on. Within our practice, that we believe that we can make those changes within our own lifetime. And so by making those positive causes towards creating a better life for ourselves and creating a better life for other people, that we're able to create those positive effects in our life to make those changes, so that when we pass away and are reborn, that the karma part of it that carries on to a much higher state of life than where we were before. And so it's just that continuation or accumulation of all those different causes that creates those effects.
Very good. Any follow-up questions or any additional questions? So I have some questions I would be happy to ask here, but I want to ask someone if they'd like to address to all the panelists, or to a single one. Go ahead.
To both in particular, just something that kind of came up that I just want to make sure.
Both, who are you referring to?
What was your name again?
Eric.
Eric and David there?
Okay, yes.
The first one's for Eric. I just want to make sure I understood that you didn't quite necessarily were like, that question doesn't really, the first question that he asked, like what were you about? That it didn't really necessarily apply to you?
Well, he's actually asking about a question or a position that I'm not necessarily advocating for.
Exactly. So where do you fall under then? If all this,
I'm glad you asked, because I wrote a position statement. You want to hear it?
I do.
Based on the null hypothesis, I don't think there is any credible evidence to conclude current or past supernatural claims accurately describe reality. Had I been able to give that as my position, and someone asked me a question about that, they wouldn't ask me, why do you think there is no God? Why do you believe there is no God? That's not the claim I'm making. I cast a wider net, and I say all faith-based supernatural claims, I see no credible evidence to suggest they are accurate. If you present me with the same type of evidence you would need to believe the Hindu claims, you might have a convert, right? I might join your team tomorrow. That quick, right? Just show me the same amount of evidence, the same type, quantity, and quality of evidence you would need to believe anyone else's supernatural claim, and you got me on board, man. Does that answer your question? Is that fair?
Yeah, pretty. So it's you're not so much about.
To be fair, I'm representing two groups.
Yeah.
One group is called IEAA, Inland Empire Atheists and Agnostics. The second group is called Free Thinkers Around Redlands. Okay, they have honored me by asking me to represent them today. So I have to be willing to accept to field questions for atheists, even though I personally do not apply the label to myself. I understand the definition of the word does apply to me. In all fairness, however, like I said, we don't label things in the negative. We label things in the positive. I don't label myself relative to what somebody else may or may not believe.
Okay, so but then where do you fall though?
I'm just Eric. I'm Eric. I'll tell you what. You know what I would really like? I would love for someone to think I am a good skeptic. If you called me a good skeptic, I would consider that a compliment. If you called me a critical thinker, I'm on cloud 9. If you called me an excellent critical thinker, man, you just made my life. Because that's how I want to interact with the world. I want to look at things pragmatically. I want to look at things skeptically. I don't want to take claims on face value, a priori. I want to investigate them for myself and know the right answer, the best possible answer, not an answer that appeals to, well, I don't know, so it must be XYZ supernaturalism. I want to know the most reasonable, most pragmatic answer. So I'm just Eric, take me or leave me. I'm representing two groups that call themselves atheists and free thinkers, so I've got to be willing to accept those and field those questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's more of a question, because you've used the word evidence. Credible evidence. 2 parts about that. One, you get to decide what credible evidence is. I do. So, for instance, there are certain things that we have to take as rationally true, even if evidence itself could refute it or not. For instance, what evidence do you have that we're not a brain in a vat connected to the matrix right now, and that this is all a computer simulation? You can't appeal to evidence to prove that, because the evidence you would appeal to would be a computer simulation. All claims are based on faith. Even our word confidence, confide, with faith. So prove to me that you're not a brain in a vat.
What you're doing is you're actually referring, and you've used a clever analogy to talk about the problem of induction.
Yes.
And you're talking about solipsism, hard solipsism. And no, I do not claim to have a solution to hard solipsism. Anyone that does, be very skeptical of them, okay? I can only interact with the world via the 5 senses that I have. That's all I've got. That's all anybody's got. And if you tell me you've got more, you're making a case of special
But
bleeding.
you assume your senses are functional.
That's the problem of induction. The problem is my senses fail sometimes. When I was a kid, my dad would drive me across the road in the desert, Death Valley, and I look on the road and what do I see? Wavy lines. It looks like water. I thought, man, we're going to drive through a puddle at 80 miles an hour. My dad's Porsche. This is going to be awesome, right? Well, as I got closer, guess what I realized? That's not water. It's just heat. The air, the sun is heating the blacktop. It's heating the air above it, and it's moving, and it's bending and changing the shape of the air to make it look like water. It's an optical illusion. Yes, my senses fail occasionally from time to time. However, guess what corrected that error? It was also my senses that corrected it. Once I got it to an angle that I could interact with it with my senses, which is all I've got, I fixed the error. Yes, I've got it. The problem of induction is still there. Hard solipsism there. I'm not claiming to have solved it. Unfortunately, it's all we've got. We can't say, because my senses occasionally get things wrong, I get to apply to supernaturalism. And oh, by the way, my supernaturalism happens to be 2,000 years old, and you should give me 10% of your
I would say
Sorry.
it seems to me, rather than evidence, it just seems like an assertion, a philosophical assertion. Because for you to appeal to evidence, you would make a justification of what evidence would be reliable.
What evidence?
And how would you know the difference and differentiate between good evidence and bad evidence? So, and love, we're good friends, by the way. I'll let you know. So all that to say, I just hear the evidence claim, and I want you guys to know that evidence is not this neutral category out there philosophically that we can appeal to, that we all have objective attainment of. It is always conditioned by your social cultural awareness, your metaphysical beliefs, your ideology, and just take that in consideration. Regardless, if you're a Christian, atheist, Jew, secular, Buddhist, doesn't matter. All of that plays a role.
What evidence do you present to someone that's skeptical of evidence to show the value of evidence?
Well,
this is the problem of induction.
No, that's good. It's good. This is an important conversation. But let's see if there's another question out here. Maybe we can get on a different topic. Yes.
All right. So I read this. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay. Well, no, I have a question for all of you, except are you atheists?
I've been asked to represent atheists.
Okay.
I'm fine saying this now.
All of you guys except you.
Eric, stay with me. We love you, Eric. We'll split the question.
Which Buddhism, Catholic, Islam, which of the following religions have the most best ideals than all the given religions? By how realistic and how plausibility for actual effectiveness, by how perfect is the goodness, justice, fairness, love, and how their beliefs are sounded.
Is that your question?
Eric, go ahead.
Maybe we can
They're all equally wrong in the same way. Fair enough?
Maybe we can condense that. I think that question, the core of that question was about ethics, right?
Yes.
Okay. So let's just ask. I do have a question about that. Let's ask about the foundation of your ethical system.
If I would pick him. I would pick what ideals.
Can you expand about the Buddhist ideals, please?
Yeah. And so that's kind of one of the questions you were asking. Yeah. But so for Buddhism, how it originated was that Shakyamuni Buddha was a prince, a very wealthy family, royalty, and within the palace that he had every kind of luxury you could imagine. But when he would look outside the palace, then he would see, poverty, he would see death, he would see the poor, and so he would see suffering. And so his main quest from that point forward was, what is suffering and how can we overcome it? And so how do we eliminate that from our lives? And so that's how he began his journey. And so ultimately, that's what Buddhism is about. Just how do we identify and overcome what causes us suffering and be able to bring joy in our lives and then help others to feel that same joy within their own lives. And so within that practice, that there's obviously a lot of philosophy with it, but how we judge whether it works, it's actually very similar to Eric's position, that that it's all based on reality, and so and that we call it testing the faith, and so that if you want to see if this practice works, this Buddhism works, then test it. And so how we begin our practice is that part of it is chanting. And it's we chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, which means devotion to the mystic law of cause and effect through sound. And I have cards with that, so you don't have to worry about writing it down. But the idea with it is that if this really does work, and this is something to be able to overcome whatever obstacles or suffering you have in your life, then obviously it's going to work. And not only is it going to work, it's not going to be 10 lifetimes from now, after we reincarnate or have our rebirth or whatever it is. But, I need it to happen now, right, if you want to prove something. And so with our practice, we use it to prove over and over again, overcoming whatever various challenges we have, that this works. And especially, it's harder for me because I was kind of born into the practice, but for people who take this on later in life, it's very clear that the path in life before they interacted with the practice and then the path they're taking after they have the practice. And so, we base it on what we see in our lives, the actual changes in our lives, and not what we hope will happen sometime in the future, but what we see with our own eyes right now.
Very good.
So in Buddhism, they use their own types of rites to prevent or stop the cause of our suffering or stop suffering at a given time.
Yeah, and so the biggest difference between our sect and some other sects of practice is that especially like Tibetan Buddhism, that they try to eliminate desires, and so and that's part of what Shakyamuni practiced. But as he traveled from village to village in India, he taught to the capacity of the villagers. And so that's why there's different sects of Buddhism, because he taught different things based on what they needed in that particular area at that particular time. And so meditation, eliminating desires was part of that. But what we believe is that desires that we have are the fuel for us to become enlightened. And so it's not that we really want to have that new car or that new house. That's not the goal of our life. But having that desire is what drives us to make the changes in our life to be able to achieve that thing. And so if you want to be a millionaire, for example, that you're going to have to make a lot of effort, a lot of changes in your life. You're going to have to build a successful business. You're going to have to go to get a better education. You're going to have to do all these things. And when you actually get to that goal, you're a better person for having gone through that journey. And so having those desires in life are the fuel for us to become better people.
All right, let's move on to another question now. I think I saw a hand back here.
Oh, and one more quick question.
We're gonna in the interest of time, we're gonna move on. But thank you. Afterwards, we're gonna have some time for you to talk to them. Let's leave it for then.
The second gentleman, you said your objection or object that you were striving for was to eliminate suffering, and you only wanted joy and peace and happiness and harmony. But I went through some pretty bad things that I thought was ridiculous that any human being would have to go through them. But looking back from this perspective, I'm glad I went through them because they taught me things. If you eliminate those, what are you going to replace them with?
Yeah.
Who's the question for? I'm sorry.
I think it was for David.
Buddhist.
I think it was for David. I think that
The idea there is those difficult, the suffering that we go through in life, right?
Yeah, and
why
so
we want to eliminate that, because that helps us.
Yeah, and so the process of overcoming those sufferings or the things that we go through is how we become just how you said, is how we become a better person. So it's not necessarily that obstacles and challenges are bad things and that we want to completely eliminate them. What it is that through that process of overcoming them, of having a better life, of helping other people have a better life, that we're able to improve ourselves. And so it's a constant journey, and obviously we can never truly eliminate suffering. That we're human beings. Things are going to happen. We're going to get cold sometimes. You can't eliminate everything. But the idea is that whatever those things that are causing that suffering, that a lot of time it can be something that's internal, it can be external, but those internal things that are causing those behaviors that create those negative environments, that we can constantly improve ourselves so that instead of creating negative causes with our life, we're creating positive causes.
That's an impossibility. The question is, you're going to eliminate them, and you're not going to glean the knowledge. The problem is, you said you're relying on you. When you're only relying on you, you don't allow anything else to come in to influence it.
We're not relying just on ourselves. That because of karma, again, that it's not only our own life and past lifetimes, future lifetimes, but it's everyone in this room. Everyone interacts with everybody else. All actions and causes and effects from all around the world. And so if there's never an alone or by yourself. And then also we have the faith aspect, of the chanting to be able to awaken to our own Buddhahood and be able to make positive changes in that life as well. So I think it's not that we're magically not going to have suffering, or that we eliminate, say, all diseases so nobody ever has to be sick again. It's not that type of thing. It's just that when you go through, like you said, when you go through those obstacles, that after you come out of them, that you're a better person. And that's what we're trying to do, just be better people.
If you can hold that question till afterwards. We just want to get as many people an opportunity to ask questions as we can. Sabrina?
This is kind of towards David, but most of you probably might have a answer for this. But in the beginning, you said talking about karma. My question was, if it is not a person's soul or memories that transfer after death, but our karma, how do we explain people that have believe in past lives and have experiences that could vividly remember things that happened in past lives? I mean, does that really exist? I mean, because when I thought about karma, when I learned this in Mr. Cervantez's class, and we talked about Buddhists and all that, you kind of get the idea that they're living past lives, that the karma and the things that they did follow them into the next life. But the way you explained it, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, so because it's a transfer of karmic tendencies, and so if a person has that a tendency towards being sick or being wealthy, being fortunate, whatever the positive or negative is, that's the part that transfers over. And so through the lifetimes that there's a different accumulation of that. And so it isn't necessarily that, I remember that I'm, Bob from the 1800s, and I fought, in this war or whatnot. It's more just that tendency that, well, I'm patriotic, I like to serve with my country, and then, maybe have a similar path in life, as far as that. But it isn't, and so for people that have past life experiences, or for example, the Dalai Lama, that, they have that constant kind of, believe in his constant reincarnation, that's kind of a different view than us, because we have the more kind of rebirth versus the strict reincarnation of the solid person from lifetime to lifetime.
Caleb?
I think Eric kind of touched on this, but some people in their belief, they're dogmatic, they know they're right, and there's not really any amount of evidence that could sway them from that. And I was just wondering, what, if any, amount of evidence would cause you to rethink your position or reevaluate your claims?
Is this for all? All of them. Okay.
The fact is that people who have faith is not knowledge, right? I think almost any thinking person, any thinking human being, coming from the ancient Greeks, we're called to think and to look at our lives. And the fact is that we will never know it all. But having faith has to be really reasoned faith. We just don't blindly believe, because in our humanity we require some kind of understanding, right? Faith seeking understanding. And so when we talk about evidence, the fact that the apostles died and gave their life on the basis of that resurrection, where really the rubber hits the road, right? If you're giving your life for something, that really means you believe it. You live it.
You want to go?
To be fair, he just mentioned something that just struck my memory here. He's right. If the claims of the Bible are accurate, then the apostles absolutely died for what they believed. The problem is, back in the 90s, there was a group in San Diego who died because they thought there was a spaceship behind a Hale-Bopp comet following them. And they really believed it. I mean, they all wore the same haircut, the same glasses, the same Nike tennis shoes. They all took the same cyanide pill.
Yep.
They genuinely believed it. So if this is the case, if the claims of the Bible are actually accurate and the apostles died the way the Bible claims, this is absolutely evidence that these people genuinely believe their claim. This does not mean their claim accurately represents reality. I think I answered your question a couple of times, so I'll yield my time, to be fair.
I would say any thinking person who is a person of faith and operates as a thinking person and a person of faith at both times. There's people who are atheists who teach at Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and there's people who are Jewish and Christian and who teach at Harvard, Yale, Princeton. So to start off and go, well, anyone who believes this, such and such, like if I came up here, if you don't believe in God, that's the most irrational thing in the world. You must be dumb if you don't believe in God. That's not an intelligible or integrous statement. There are very much smart, intellectual, sophisticated people who hold different positions than me, and I think I need to honor the fact that they are rational beings. Jeff has a doctorate. I have a doctorate. I don't think lots of people have doctorates who are different perspectives, right? So all that to say is, I don't think there's no gotcha moment. Like, yeah, you're all idiots. Gotcha. I don't think that's how it works. So, what would cause me to doubt my faith? Well, I think one thing would be, I believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus. You pull the body out of the ground, carbon dating and DNA testing's done, and people, there he is. I would ditch my faith. My faith is based on the resurrection of Jesus. But I would also say one quick thing about faith. I don't think faith is this all or nothing thing. Do you know what I'm saying? I believe every single word, every detail, 100%. I have no doubts, or I don't believe. Most people I know who are atheist, agnostic, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, they believe, but then they have some areas of doubt and question. The reality is we have to live in tension of both of those at once. And so sometimes I might be 51% Christian. Do you know what I'm saying? Right? For me, intellectually, my faith has not gone below that percentage. And I'm open to anybody trying to challenge me. But I would say, for me, but the idea, I think sometimes people paint faith as like dogmatic, uncritical, they know everything perspectively, and I just don't think that's an accurate or fair representation of faith. I think all of us should live openly, read lots of books, or read more atheist books than I do Christian books. Why? I don't want to base my life on a lie. And I hope that those who take a different position do the same.
I guess I kind of sort of answered the question already, but for me, I guess it'd be kind of more like a pragmatic kind of thing that, the reason that I practice Buddhism isn't necessarily because my parents did. That, although they encouraged me to look at other faiths and other religions, and I really just stuck with it because I'm a very logical, straightforward person. And if something, works, then it should work. And every time I've ever used the practice to be able to achieve something or overcome an obstacle, it's worked. And so for me, it'd be pretty simple that if it stops working, then I'll stop believing it. And so, for me, again, it's very pragmatic. And so that's why I continue this faith. And it's, based on, logic and based on accomplishing whatever goals you may have.